Hello, you are in the correct session. This is the one on diversity, inclusion, on racial equity. Could be Man Action, could be others. I was allowed to do something a bit different. It's a serious session. Bonjour, mesdames, mesdemoiselles, messieurs. Je travaille à l'ONU. J'ai une carte ici. Ça dit que je suis haut fonctionnaire de l'ONU et j'ai le statut diplomatique. Je vous remercie. This moment, I wanted to show you different things that could happen. I hope you're not judging me on the way I look or based on my clothes or my appearance. I'm the same person. You've been used to seeing me in the mostly regular UN clothes, I would say. And if you don't mind, I will ask you to think for a moment. I would not need pictures of slides, please. Can we just put me off of camera for a second, please?
As I am off screen for a few seconds, this is a good time for reflection, perhaps. You may be judging me based on my clothing, or perhaps by my appearance, by the way I look. But the way I look does not define who I am as a person, as a human being, a peacekeeper, a humanitarian, as an international public servant, as a UN official. So you can change your clothes, but you can't change your race, your skin color, the way you look.
This session is about inclusion and diversity. Hopefully we can talk about tough issues, power, bias, privilege, discrimination, perceptions, and facts. And my role here is to chair a session. My name is Bruno Donat. I'm usually double-hatted. I am the head of the UNMAS office in Geneva, part of the Office of Rule of Law and Security Institutions of the Department of Peace Operations. And I'm also the global coordinator of the Man Action area of responsibility within the UNHCR-led Global Protection Cluster. I was told to set the scene, and my colleagues told me I have 6 bullet points that I'm allowed to do, excluding announcement. My first bullet point is over. First announcement, this event is being recorded and will be available online, and there's simultaneous translation available in the 6 official languages of the UN. And I think we would have explained there's on the platform something called Interprefy. You can follow from all the languages. Before I go on to set the scene, I would like to tell you that I'm joined by an excellent panel of speakers with me on the floor. Briefly to appear, I have the pleasure to tell you of SRSG Bintou Keita, will be joined by Ms. Valentina Stivanello, who is country director of MAG in Sri Lanka, General Khalid Hamdan Adam Abdullah, Director General of the National Mine Action Center Office of Khartoum in Sudan, and Mr. Wolfgang Bindseil of the German Federal Foreign Office, and also currently chair of the Mine Action Support Group. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, to be on that panel. My bullet number 2 is to tell you that this session is inspired by the call of the United Nations Secretary General for Global Engagement. He's asking us to understand and address the way racism and discrimination manifest themselves in the work environment. And he established the task force on addressing racism and promoting dignity for all. And I believe the task force will be working through end of September this year. My bullet point number 3, again, for context purposes, is the first time, it seems to me, so many of you are more experienced than me in the mine action sector, but I do have some years in the UN, including the bank, the World Bank. It's a space to address initially issues, having honest and open conversations on racial equity. We decided to have as honest of a conversation. We know it can be painful, uncomfortable, very real for some people. Some people can get very angry. And it's not about being white or black or what you wear. We are using the lens of inclusion and diversity, focusing on racial equity. I'm done with my first 3 bullets. My number 4, if we can give you the larger context, I would like to talk very briefly. I am not a specialist about something called intersectionality. We took this drawing, at least intersection is like crossroads of when, let's say, streets meet, that there are different categories that can define your identity. And at the intersection is called intersectionality. So today's discussion, we are using that as a lens, but we would focus on race. So it could be somebody's class, sexual orientation, your race, or an ability or disability. So I wanted to tell you the context is larger, but today we won't, and they all influence your identity. Another drawing that we saw, and these are not from us, hopefully eventually we'll give credit to the people who did it. So what influence, it could be your language, your accent, culture, age, education, race, ethnicity, etc. Therefore, maybe different experiences will be lived differently by different people, depending on who they are and how they look. I'm done on point number 4. Setting the scene, point number 5. I think early I could have said perception and facts. So I want to say, while we were preparing that, there was some obstacle because it's a difficult subject. And we did ask for some data on demographics to some usual organization with whom we work, and it was not easy. People were not feeling comfortable, or maybe they say it's not too legal to share. So what I did, I went in-house together with some team members, and I remember our boss telling us it's important to show facts and data. So to make sure we understand, we do not have all the data. This is the first conversation. It's not comprehensive, but I'm going in-house to tell you what I saw. Let me show you a pie. I think I'm showing you a pie of some of my colleagues in-house. I will show you the same picture 4 times. Those who know the UN, where I work in UNMAS, we looked at the HQ, which is the headquarters. And it's a quick snapshot of how are the staff who are at P3 and above, where are they from? You see the pie. You can see here Europe, how much, Middle East and North Africa, how much, Asia, Latin America and Caribbean, 4%, Northern America, 29%, MENA 11%, Asia 4%, Europe 52%. Let's look at that same picture again. Some will say, well, from the Western world, they are 81%, non-Western 19%. Let's look at that picture again. Here we see that staff from countries where we have our operations, it's 4%, and staff from other countries, 96%. I could still stand corrected. We don't have all the information, but I think 84% of UNMAS operations take place with the combined Sub-Saharan Africa and MENA region, 84%. Let's finish with the slide. Then we said, how many staffers, one slice of the pie? It's almost invisible because it is invisible. What is the percentages of staff from Sub-Saharan Africa at HQ, P3 and above? 0%. This is not a perception, these are facts. I think I'm done with bullet point number 5. It's not comprehensive, it's the beginning of the conversation. Let's carry on. My last point, bullet point number 6, I thank my bosses, I think, for the leadership in accepting behind the scenes. I don't know, it was me who proposed to have a session to discuss, because there are some things that are happening that are difficult to deal with. Yet, at the same time, we are encouraged by at least the boss, our big boss, the SG, the Secretary General, to denounce racial discrimination, all kinds of discrimination by gender, to denounce as much as we can. And this is a good platform. Racial equity is about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. We may come back to that later. I should like now to introduce the speakers we have on this panel. It's the beginning of a conversation. I'm really privileged to introduce SRSG Bintou Keita, who, despite an extremely busy schedule today, where she's had to take care of some difficult issues herself where she is. And many of you know of SRSG Keita, who was also at HQ. I met her many years ago when she was in Burundi. Under Secretary General, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Let me start by applauding the fact that in your annual event, you have the courage with the leadership of UNMAS to engage in this conversation. As you said, it's not an easy conversation because of the intersectionality, a number of people will come at it from various perspectives and angles, and yet it's about individual experience, but it's also about collective experience. It's about group experience and so forth. So I think you said it's the beginning of a conversation, and I do believe so. So I'm going to speak for a few minutes just to react on some of the points that you made, because I don't think it's about making a speech or a statement, just sharing some points with you. First of all, when I was thinking about this session, and I let my imagination go, I realized that you are having this session at a very specific moment in time. 1 year ago, we had I Can't Breathe, and this was for 9 excruciating minutes from George Floyd, who was killed before our very eyes. And this went very viral in the world. And it triggered a number of what I will call demonstrations. And when we look at the demonstrations, it was worldwide. It was in the US, but it was also worldwide. And you could see shocks, you could see sadness, you could see anger. And you would go and say, okay, so if this is what is happening, so we should not be seeing anymore anyone being killed because of his race, because he's a threat, because he's creating fears in other people. And yet, months later, and not much older than a few months, we had also reactions anti the people, Asian people. And you would think, but haven't we learned from what has happened with George Floyd? We were all on our standing and saying, never again. And then I said to myself, look, I have to go back to the United Nations Charter. It clearly says, we, the people of the United Nations, determine to reaffirm our faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the person, the human person. And I insist on the human person. And I think it was brilliant what you did before when you came in first with your clothes and your glasses, etc., saying, it's not what you see. You can remove all your clothes, but there is one thing you are not going to be able to change is how you look like, your skin look like. It's not something you choose. It's something which is with you from morning to night, and it is something which is with you throughout your life until you go. And depending on what you believe in another world, whatever it is. So I think, and I continue with the UN Charter, because it says, after human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations, large and small, etc. So that for me is quite setting the scene, the stage of what we are going to talk about. Because clearly, when we had 1 year ago this tragic event, we have all these pledges that something is going to be done. You've said it. The Secretary General has been very clear. It also, racism, institutional racism exists also within the United Nations workplace. And I can say, as a person who has already spoke when I was in New York, that I'm a perfect reflection of intersectionality. So when it comes to intersectionality, what the SG is saying is, please, 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 the values, the principles that we are having is to ensure that each and everyone has a place, is respected, the dignity is acknowledged, the visibility is there. And I was thinking, let's say everyone is saying whose voices, whose picture. You talked a lot about the picture, looking at the pie chart, right? And I'm saying a number of us were saying, let's have a seat at the table. Today, I would say, because of COVID-19, let's have our picture in this virtual platform, on this virtual platform. So if we were to turn the screen and see who is there, what are we going to see? Is it going to be your last try where you would see, oh, maybe this doesn't represent diversity. This doesn't represent racial diversity. I don't know, based on some of the information and the data that you gave us. Now, it's also something which literally bothers me. We say we are 193 member states, so the United Nations world workforce is diverse. And then you start reflecting and say, diverse? Okay, but there is a diversity issue for sure in the United Nations, in spite of the diverse workforce. So not to conflate being cosmopolitan world, being an inclusive and racially equitable within the United Nations. So for me, we still have a long way to go. And as I said, I applaud the leadership of the Secretary General. I applaud the leadership of various layers in the organization who have now the courage to tackle the issue. But if we want to tackle the issue, we have to go into the data. And as you said, I could see how you were uncomfortable because some may challenge the data. Then the situation becomes, whose data are we talking about? The data from the human resources, which says it's about nationalities, geographic representation, grouping, or is it the individual who can say, I'm from this race or the other race? So whose data are we talking about? And I hope within the context of the task force, which has been established by the Secretary General, courage to go on this data and at some point have a common understanding of the baseline of the data that we are talking about. So there is not different groups coming with different data. So whose data? Then the behaviors. The behaviors is something which I was very pleased lately because I saw in a context of the discussion, which was integration, that somehow the United Nations has come to a place where the behaviors would matter. And it's going to be a way to look at a conducive environment in a workplace. So I'm like, okay, so if this is going on for integration, what about looking at behaviors in the context of racism and institutional racism? I want to pause here to give you two examples. And I like what you said. It's not about being black, being white, or whatever you want to say, but how the different groups react to different things. When I was in Darfur, I came in a place where I'm in Arabic-speaking country, and in my front office, no one except one administrative staff was speaking the language which would connect to the communities. And I said, but how this is possible? So I have to find Arabic speakers in my front office because I will be connecting and be more efficient with the Darfuris and also with Khartoum. And I'm glad that we have someone from Khartoum associated on this panel. So when I had the two Arabic speakers I added in my office, you know what happened? I had a number of colleagues, Black colleagues, African colleagues, who complained because they say, oh, you hired someone from Algeria and you hired someone from Palestine. And I said, but what this has to do with, I'm looking at competencies and I'm looking at efficiency. So this is one example. Second example, headquarters. When I came in, except my personal assistant, everyone around me was from a certain place, from a certain world. So one person came to me and said, look, I don't see myself in your front office. So when I left, I had in my front office added a Chinese JPO. I made sure that we had one Ethiopian colleague who could remain in the workforce, and so forth and so on. But you know what? This also created reaction because of, oh, Chinese GPO, what this is. So again, I think from all spectrum, you have to work on what it is, the values and the principles that we are anchoring. And so we are looking at the human being as a professional who has to deliver in a professional mandate in a workplace, and not looking at each other from the perspective of which color, which gender, etc., or race. So then we also have to look into the policies, because we are talking about institutional racism. So how the policies are reflecting or helping, enabling, and nurturing a shift and mindset, etc. We have to work on the policies, and it's a long way to go. We also have to work on accountability, because clearly, if there are behaviors that are not conducive for the world the United Nations Charter is aspiring for, there should be sanctions and no complacency. But for me, the way I look at it, there are some advances, but we still have a long way to go as with regard to what I call walking the talk. And I hope 1 year from now, because I look at various pledges that were made at the time of I Can't Breathe. I asked one of my daughters to look at how many lived up to the pledges that they made. It's very little. It's very little. So we still have a world to build. And within the United Nations, I'm hopeful that we are going to make a difference. And I hope that UNMAS, when we will turn the picture, we will have the diversity that is needed for each and every one to see each other reflected in the mirror or in the virtual platform. And I stop here because I think I have exhausted the time that you allocated to me to react.
Merci, Madame. Thank you so much. Very inspiring words. I cannot agree more with you. And I think you know that we happen to cross paths in some of the same conversations. And very inspiring to the Mind Action community live right now, looking at you. And we will aspire to do more. And again, we're on the same page in that we are thanking, at least where I am, I'm thanking my leadership to be even able to speak of such a difficult conversation. Merci beaucoup. We go now to the second panelist, Ms. Stivanello, who is currently in Sri Lanka as country director for MAG. Valentina Stivanello, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Bruno, and SRSG. I'm really humbled by your words. I hope I will be able to add something meaningful to the discussion. And good afternoon, all. It is a real privilege to be joining all of you today in this forum on this crucial topic, racial equity in mine action. I was informed that we are not here to look into unpack question of race or white privilege or how the colonial hangover is still impacting the global aid sector today. We are here to make an honest assessment of the progresses the mine action sector has made towards racial equity, to acknowledge where we stand and where we need to go to become truly inclusive and diverse organization. And as mentioned, we have certainly a long way to go. MAG started this journey last year. Those 8 minutes and 46 seconds that took George Floyd's life not only opened the eyes of millions of people around the world, but also of MAG's leadership, who spurred on a call to action by MAG staff, began to prioritize the groundwork needed for more systematic progress towards an increasingly diverse and inclusive mine action organization. There are good examples to start from, and just really a few to mention today. The leadership took the decision to commit own funding to prioritize the recruitment of a global diversity and inclusive advisor. We established 2 internal gender and diversity steering groups to open up channels of communication and active engagement in which staff can raise concerns in a safe space and propose inclusive actions. MAG Global Gender Advisor has taken deliberate action to conduct induction on gender and racial diversity across MAG. The leadership commissioned a gender and diversity review on MAG interns and practice undertaken in January this year. We have included active bystander training in safeguarding and as part of all HQ and international staff appraisals objective for 2021-2022. Working on shifting the white gaze by encouraging country programs to increasingly localize, establishing, expanding, and strengthening partnership with local actors, acknowledging the need of more inclusive local leadership and financial redistribution of resources. While racial equality is about more than just the numbers of people of color you employ, MAG has a fairly good percentage of people of color in leadership positions, at country programs, less so at HQ. However, MAG has recently approved additional capacity to recruit a diversity and inclusion manager who will manage MAG interns and diversity and organizational culture change. This position will sit in MAG's HR team, where we hope to make the difference. And more importantly, MAG has committed to create an enabling environment to bring change. But we could and should do more, and it's not so simple. Ultimately, we not only need to be diverse, but to ensure that within that diversity, all voices are heard. Representation is, of course, key to that, and this goes beyond a single organization. We have only to look at the most senior levels in our sector to see what we still have a lot of work to do there. And we have seen in the chart presented by Bruno and as mentioned by the SRSG. While we work on improving representation, there is though more that people in implicit possession of privilege can do to support others and amplify their voices. We can start by creating an internal organizational culture of openness to critique and ensure that this is cognizant of race, gender, age, and any other factors that might impact someone's willingness to open up. We can try and recruit differently, and in particular reassess the need for recruiting expatriate staff for any position based overseas and commit to recruiting a greater diversity of staff in offices in the global north, including our board members, CEOs, directors, decision makers. We should increasingly invest in indigenous knowledge creation and value local knowledge, moving away from the implicit, arrogant language of delivering capacity building. Donors should reconsider the way they provide funding, creating resources that are accessible to all local actors, innovating the confines of existing project models and timelines. We should openly institute anti-racist policies and unconscious bias trainings for all. We should ensure that we understand what diversity means in each of the contexts in which we work, the specific intersectionality that impact people's access to resources, and work towards building belonging, support, and trust. Where I currently work in Sri Lanka, I experienced firsthand how essential is not just what we do to be diverse and inclusive, but how we engage others in the process. When in 2019, I attempted to establish a partnership with a local demining organization, there was surprising a lot of reluctance from their end. Not just our frameworks were designed to subcontract rather than to jointly decide and implement, but there was no trust from their side, because from their perspective, they did not need us, neither our expertise nor our funding. I was initially unable to understand their perspective and didn't know how to approach it. It took several months, several meetings, a lot of time spent with them to understand where they were coming from, to learn about their organization, background, and expertise, to share what was easily accessible to me, making it easily accessible to them too, such as joint engagement with embassies, joint development of proposal, and joint strategy development. I got to understand that their prejudice and perception of international organization was built on years where, time and again, they were treated as less capable from other INGOs, but also from donors. There is now a strong partnership between us, They are actually a strong ally through the challenges we face, and their voice at times is more influential than others or ours in the Sri Lankan context. That is a relationship of mutual respect and trust. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action of the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance. 20 years have passed since, and forms of racial inequality, exclusion, and suprematist rhetoric continue to afflict staff and communities, policies, and leadership, in the mine action sector too. So we must change. We know that, and it's going to take time and resources, but we can do it if we collectively take action. MAG firmly believes the mine action sector is ready to change under the guidance of UNMAS, who has already shown leadership by proposing to focus this plenary session on this delicate subject. I hope that we will leave this room today with a collective commitment to discuss this again at the NDM next year, to share the progress we all have made. Thank you again, and I look forward to further discussion.
Thank you so much, Valentina. As colleagues are taking notes, not only were we inspired by the SRSG, but also you say what would happen until the next NDM next year. I'm a bit more ambitious. I say we should follow up regularly, that it doesn't become a one session in an NDM and we forget about it. At least I will check with my bosses, of course, maybe with some people who can support, but we would want, now that we open this, and you have some very good ideas at MAG that you talked about. In any case, thank you so much. They are telling me to go a bit more quickly. I now have the pleasure to have a third panelist from Khartoum, Sudan. I would like to introduce Brigadier General Khalid Hamdan Adan Abdullah, who is the Director General of the National Mine Action Center Office in Khartoum. General, you have the floor, please.
شكرا السيد رئيس الجلسة السيد برونو دونالد. كما أرحب بالحضور الكرام وأرحب بالسيدة بنيتو كيتا والسيدة فالنتينا والسيد وولفغانغ بنسيل. الحضور الكريم سعيد بالمشاركة في هذا الموضوع الحيوي والهام. Next slide. يعتبر الاحترام المتبادل جوهر استمرار الحياة الإنسانية، ودونه يفقد الناس عنصرا أساسيا يتعلق بالأمن والأمان، كما تعتبر المساواة وفق الأدوار المنوطة بمكونات البشر المختلفة جوهر نجاح الحياة واستمرارها دون معوقات تهدد المجتمع الواحد وتجعل مصيره إلى زوال. لكل ذلك يجب أن نكون أكثر واقعية ونضع عثرات الماضي جانبا ونتكاتف من أجل حياة كريمة يسهم الجميع في تحقيقها دون إقصاء أو إبعاد. ولا بد من الاعتراف بأن المساواة بين الأجناس وبين المرأة والرجل لم تكن ضمن أجندة الكثيرين في الماضي القريب، وهو أمر يستوعب قدرا وافرا من الموضوعية في مواجهة المشكلة وصولا لتحديد الداء واختيار الدواء المناسب. Next slide. هنالك بعض التعاريف لا بد أن نتعرض لها. التنوع هو مجموعة السمات الموجودة في مجموعة من الأشخاص، بينما الشمولية هي مقاربة تعزز قدرة وفرص وكرامة الأشخاص المحرومين بسبب هويتهم لكي يتمكنوا من المشاركة في المجتمع. أما المساواة فهي التمتع بجميع الحقوق والموارد والفرص والحماية دون تمييز بسبب الدين أو اللون أو اللغة أو الجنس أو المستوى الاجتماعي. Next slide. Next slide. إن مشكلة عدم المساواة والجندر مشاكل التنوع وعدم احترام الخصوصيات في العالم قديمة قدم التاريخ، ومن الصعب جدا تحديد تاريخ بعينه لبداية هذه الظاهرة ذات الطابع العنصري البغيض. نورد هنا بعض أسباب عدم المساواة العرقية واحترام التنوع والشمول، وتعتبر هذه الأسباب وغيرها مدعاة لمقاومة المساواة في العالم، وأهمها الجهل وعدم الوعي، الاعتقاد بأن أحد الجنسين هو أرقى وأفضل من الآخر، التفاخر بالأنساب والطعن في غيرها، الظروف المادية، اختلاف اللغات وتفضيل لغة على سواها، الطمع والجشع والاستغلال والعقيدة والفكر والثقافة، بعض العادات الموروثة. Next slide. إن تعميم الجندر والتنوع والمساواة في البرامج المتعلقة بمكافحة الألغام في السياسات والبرامج العمليات يلزم بالمساواة في التوزيع والاهتمام بكل فئات المجتمع. إن التوازن في تركيبة الفرق العاملة في مجال مكافحة الألغام يعني سهولة التعاون مع الأفراد في المجتمعات المتأثرة، ويؤدي إلى أنشطة أكثر فعالية، ويضمن استجابة المجتمع، كما يساعد في زيادة الفاعلية العملياتية من أجل السلام والعمل الإنساني. Next slide. أفرزت ظاهرة عدم المساواة العرقية وعدم الاهتمام والتنوع الكثير من الصراعات في بعض البلدان ونزوع عدد من المجتمعات من مناطقهم. إضافة لذلك فقد تؤدي هذه الظاهرة إلى الآتي: تولد الكراهية بين الأجناس والأنواع، شعور بعدم الثقة تجاه الجنس والنوع الآخر، بالإضافة لإشعال شرارة الصراع في المجتمعات التي لا توجد فيها مساواة عرقية. أما في مجال العمل فإنه يحد كثيرا من توظيف بعض الأعراق ولا يحقق التنوع في العمل، وبالتالي يقلل من الإنتاجية والأفكار المتجددة. Next slide. Next slide. إن تطبيق المساواة والتنوع في المنظمات والوكالات العاملة في مجال برنامج الألغام يعزز الآتي: التأثير الإيجابي على سمعة البرنامج بقبوله من كل الأطراف. التنوع يحفز الموظف على الإبداع، زيادة الابتكار لوجود أعضاء من مختلف الأجناس والأعراق، زيادة الإنتاجية، الوصول إلى كل المناطق، بالإضافة لتوسيع دائرة ترشح الوظائف وضمان بقاء الموظف في عمله بسبب الاحترام والعدالة في المعاملة وتطبيق المساواة. Next slide. بادرت الأمم المتحدة منذ وقت مبكر في العام 1963 بإبرام الاتفاقية الدولية للقضاء على جميع أشكال التمييز العنصري في جميع أنحاء العالم بكافة أشكاله ومظاهره، وجعلت الحقوق متساوية للجميع في المعاملة. فيما يختص بالمرأة فقد أصدرت الأمم المتحدة قرار في سيداو يعالج كافة أشكال التمييز ضدها. كل هذه القرارات تحث الجمعية الأمم المتحدة الأطراف على المساواة نبذ الكراهية. إضافة لذلك فهنالك بعض الحلول المطلوبة في المجتمعات لمعالجة ظاهرة عدم المساواة، وهي تطبيق الحكومات لمبدأ العدل والمساواة بين الجميع، فرض عقوبات على كل معارضي مبدأ التنوع والمساواة، يقع على عاتق المؤسسات التعليمية دور توعية الأجيال، أيضا قيام المنظمات الحقوقية بحملات تثقيفية للقضاء على ظواهر عدم المساواة، العمل وفق موجهات البرامج العالمية على غرار برنامج مكافحة الألغام، والذي يلتزم خطا واضحا لضمان تحقيق المساواة بين مكونات المجتمع المختلفة دون إقصاء أو تهميش، ويحفظ الحقوق وفق معايير موحدة وملزمة لمنسوبيه كافة، وكل ذلك محكوم باتفاقية أتوا والمحاور المتعلقة بها. Next slide. ما زالت الأمور المختصة بالشمول والتنوع والمساواة تتأرجح من بلد لآخر وهذا هو الوضع الحالي، وحتى داخل البلدان تتأرجح من منطقة لأخرى بين نجاحات مقبولة ومقاومات غير مبررة، في معظمها ترتبط بالثقافات والممارسات السلبية، ولكن الجهود متواصلة من قبل برنامج مكافحة الألغام العالمي الذي يعمل في تناسق وتناغم مع الجهات المختصة والبرامج داخل الدول ذات الصلة من أجل تكثيف الجهود والعمل الجاد من أجل فتح مسارات ممكنة داخل الممارسات والثقافات وأخذ الجيد منها وصولا للأهداف المتعلقة بالشمول والمساواة واحترام التنوع العرقي والديني والقبلي. Next slide. Next slide. فيما يختص بالسودان فقد استوعبت شعارات ثورة ديسمبر المجيدة القضايا والأزمات التي أقعدت الوطن عقودا متتالية، وأسفرت المفاوضات عن توقيع سلام في جوبا عاصمة دولة جنوب السودان بين الحكومة وفصائل الكفاح المسلح للاستجابة لمطالب الجميع لتحقيق المساواة والعدالة والشمول، لإشراك الجميع في هياكل الحكم المختلفة مع الاتفاق على المساواة والشمول والتنوع في كافة الوظائف. في مجال مكافحة الألغام فإن البرنامج يمضي قدما في تحقيق أهدافه مراعيا لكل أشكال التعدد في النوع والحاجات والمساواة في العمل لكل المناطق المتأثرة دون تفضيل منطقة على أخرى، مع الالتزام بمبدأ التنوع والمساواة للعاملين في المركز القومي لمكافحة الألغام وكل المنظمات العاملة في مجال مكافحة الألغام للأغراض الإنسانية. Next slide. نخلص من ذلك فإن لبرنامج مكافحة الألغام للأغراض الإنسانية دور كبير في معالجة مشكلة التنوع والشمول والمساواة العرقية، وذلك من خلال توظيف العاملين حسب الكفاءة دون الالتفات للنوع أو الجنس أو العرق، وكذلك توجيه الأتيام العاملة إلى المناطق المتأثرة وفق الحاجات الملحة دون تمييز منطقة على أخرى. يتم كل ذلك من خلال القيام بنشاط التحليل الجندري واحترام الثقافات والعادات والتقاليد، والعمل على دعم المجتمعات ومساعدتها على الانضمام لعجلة الإنتاج في بلدانها وصولا لرفاه إنسانها، ويتجلى ذلك في حجم ومستوى تدعيم الخدمات المقدمة للمجتمعات المتأثرة والكوادر التي يتم اختيارها لتنفيذ البرامج المتعلقة بمكافحة الألغام. إن التنوع بكل تأكيد هو فن التفكير بشكل مستقل، وفي نفس الوقت معا هو فلسفة حياتية يتوجب فهمها والعمل بها للوصول لحياة كريمة لكل فئات المجتمع. المجتمع هو الوحدة الأساسية في مسألة الشمول والتنوع والمساواة، وتعدد المجتمعات قد تؤدي الطرق المختلفة أحيانا إلى نفس القلعة. القوة تكمن في الاختلاف وليس في أوجه التشابه، لأن التشابه يعوزه الإبداع وتعوزه استغلالية بعض الفئات ذات الهشاشة البائنة ورهن غرارها وهضم حقوقها وما يجب تجنبه. الشمول والتنوع في العالم هو سمة أساسية للمجتمع البشري، وهو أيضا الشرط الأساسي لعالم حيوي وديناميكي مثل الذي نراه اليوم، حيث أنني أحتاج إلى هذا وأنت تحتاج إلى ذاك، وعندما نعمل معا أحصل أنا على ذاك وهذا وتحصل أنت على هذا وذاك، وعندما نقترب أكثر نحصل معا على ذاك وهذا وهذا وذاك. أخيرا نحن جميعا مختلفون، وهذا شيء رائع لأننا جميعا فريدون. بدون تنوع ستكون الحياة مملة للغاية، ويجب أن نتذكر بأن الكثير من الزهور المختلفة عندما تجمع معا تصنع باغة جميلة تعجب الكل. شكرا لإصغائكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Mr. Bruno, floor for you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your words. And I got your interpretation. It has been translated with a little bit of delay, but I understood everything you said. Thank you very much. And now we are a bit behind schedule. Let's move. So what I'm saying, apologies for, we might go over time to not do the whole program, but at least get a few questions in for ourselves and exchange of information. The next panelist, as I explained before, is Mr. Wolfgang Bindseil, who is from the German Federal Foreign Office and currently the chair of the Mine Action Support Group. Mr. Bindseil, you have the floor, please, sir.
Yes, good afternoon, Bruno, and dear colleagues and listeners. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this extremely timely and extremely important panel. It's a topic that has not been discussed much in the past, and I think it's extremely appropriate to discuss it now. This has been said before. It has to do with events exactly 1 year ago, and the consequences this had on the consciousness of on a global scale of everybody. It was as if the tragic events, the death of one black person in the hands of a white police officer, brought up worldwide history of racism and oppression. And so against this background, I believe it was an extremely appropriate idea, and I would like to thank Bruno for this, to have a discussion on mine action, on our specific sector, on this topic. Racial equity and is not least important, and the slides, Bruno, you showed were very much to the point, because the majority of affected countries are in the global south, if I may say, whereas the donors and the main international operators are coming from the industrialized north. So there's a good reason for have a thorough debate, and I would like to mention, because I mentioned the donor side and I'm the representative of the donor side, we should be self-critical in that respect. As donors, we haven't paid a lot of attention in the past to the subject of racial inclusion in mine action. And neither did we more generally in the humanitarian field, humanitarian action. At least in our German system, I might say, the mechanism in humanitarian assistance implies a focus on immediate and urgent needs by affected populations. And so there is an inclusion discussion in this, and this is about target groups, particular needs of girls and women, for example, particular needs of disabled people, of the elderly, of children, but race is not part of this, and we do not explicitly ask for inclusion of certain ethnic groups in general. Our funds are mainly directed towards the UN system, towards the ICRC, and then towards a group of specialized NGOs, of course. And then again, if speaking about the German NGOs, they have a history, a significant part from them are coming from church-based organizations like Caritas, like Miserio, and so on. And these organizations, and for reasons of history and tradition, at least staff at headquarters reflect more the ethnicity of the country of provenience. I mean, in my case, Germany. This hasn't changed much in the last years, to my knowledge. And of course, we face a similar situation in the mine action service, in the mine action sector. We check a lot of criteria before making a funding decision. Most importantly, it's about project effectivity and project efficiency. They have to be convincing. And then again, as I mentioned, it's about gender inclusion and other aspects of inclusion. We do not have any checkbox regarding race or ethnic diversity, and neither do we have a look at the composition of staff from NGOs, from operators. Obviously, there are reasons for this. One is the natural prioritization of project effectivity. I mean, this is, of course, an important criteria. But the other is the tradition of respecting private enterprise autonomy. That means that staff composition is not part of our project examination. And finally, also, we understand that racial diversity does not imply per se differences in needs for different races also. Of course, there are sometimes exceptions. There is a project, for example, in Colombia, where we have certain affected groups of African, Caribbean people and also of indigenous people with very specific needs where this plays a role. But this is in general not the case. And then I might also say ethnicity is often, which is complicating the situation. Ethnicity is sometimes very conflict sensitive. In case of ethnic tensions between communities, for example, also the choice of the beneficiary group might be sensitive. After the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example, you wouldn't come with deminers from one ethnic group to demine a field in the other ethnic group. And this is not even talking about race. This is just about ethnic composition. Okay, so what I want to say is, from a donor perspective, we have a certain understanding for a lot of marginal conditions that operators are facing in the field. And also we believe in decentralized knowledge, meaning that as a donor, we wouldn't interfere more than necessarily into management decisions or operations on the field. We would leave this to the operators. Now, having said all this, this is not to say that more attention could not and should not be paid to racial inclusion in mine action. We may take a look at the theme of gender inclusivity. which now it is very well established and not disputed, I think, anywhere. But this was not the case 20 years ago. And today we have a lot of examples of female deminers and even female deminers in South Sudan, for example, very traditional societies, where the argument that, for example, mine action might not be the right field to have inclusivity and gender is proven wrong. And obviously, we could learn from that, perhaps, that there is progress is possible. In the long run, this is certainly something we should have in mind also as donors. We should avoid settings where racial distinctions are obvious along hierarchy lines, or also between mine action staff on the one side and affected populations on the other side. This comes back to the slides you showed at the beginning. And of course, and I haven't talked about this at all because it is too obvious actually, but I will mention it anyway now. Non-discrimination and of course the ban of racism is something that must be a guiding principle for any organization under any circumstances. To close with a remark back from the donor perspective, as donors, we might want to have a closer look at local mine action organizations. We, Germany, do fund some local organizations, but again, this is an exception more than the rule. We have an organization called Campaña Colombia Contras Minas in Colombia, but mostly for logistical, for organizational, for supervision reasons, and for compliance requirements, and perhaps also for language barriers, we tend to look for the established and reputed international operators. With technological innovation, possibly, there might be a chance to reconsider these barriers and have a more direct access to organizations coming from the affected countries. This might be a path to be explored further. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Wolfgang, Mr. Bindseil. Very inspiring. So I would probably be one of those colleagues following up on some of the ideas you floated, because as I said earlier, this is part of a conversation. And obviously, I mean, it was obvious. We had a representative from the UN, from the NGO world, from the donors, from the national directors. But thank you so much. There are a few points we will pick up and follow up on, and to see how we can, because to support in the larger realm of inclusion and diversity, racial equity, which this session is. Thank you so much. So I have an announcement to the organizers. We thought we had an extra timing to do a bit more of discussion. Unfortunately, our VIP speakers who are meant to speak have other engagements, so we do not have that extra little buffer that we thought we could have had. So I just got a message, all caps, of that I need to close within the next 5 minutes. That's my understanding. If there's a new news, please let me know. So we won't have time to do the Slido. We won't have time. I know I want to recognize at least that we had on the waiting list ready to speak Miss Lucy Pinches, who works at NPA, and she was ready to deliver a statement on behalf of the Gender and Diversity Working Group. What I suggest is we will take your statement and we will put on the website. I will ensure that it happens. And I understand that our fellow colleague, Tasha Gill, child protection, senior advisor, child protection in humanitarian action at UNICEF, is also backstage ready to speak, but we will not have time. There are so many comments right now. I may say it's pretty much positive. A few tough questions about the composition of staffers. Great, I'm quoting, great topic. I wonder how the pie chart looks for the most important INGOs in the man action sector. How many programs are headed by national of that country? How many people from man-affected countries are in HQ position, etc. The questions remain the same. So I move, and with apologies to all of you, we will follow up. One announcement, in the chat, we have put a survey about this session with questions on racial equity. We were inspired by the one made by the UN task force put out by the SG. So in closing, I would like to thank all of you. It is not an easy conversation. From my part of the shop we are in, we need to make sure we look at what we have, how to do concrete steps to move this conversation forward. At least in the organization I work for, we are encouraged by the SG to denounce any form of discrimination. And I think some of us, of our colleagues, we have to think about when we judge people by the way they look, by what they wear. I think we have the same power we have to do all kinds of things. The change will come from you, colleagues of the man action sector. The change, you should transfer the power that you have, whether you have some privileges, use them to empower other people. It is not a blame game. It's just that we need to do more. And I will talk to some partners to see if from this session can be born some kind of a regular conversation. It's not another NDM, but we will try to keep in touch and we'll see what the results of the survey tell us. So I hope I didn't forget anything. I need to go, otherwise we'll get into big trouble. Thank you so much for your attention, and I pass the floor to the Master of Ceremonies of the NDM. I believe it would be my colleague, Abigail.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bruno, and all of those speakers and all of the people, as you said, who wrote into the chat, who contributed to that plenary. That was really a really thoughtful way for us to conclude the plenary sessions. So as Bruno noted, we're moving swiftly on to the closing ceremony, which will start in a few moments with the usual NDM drumbeat. So please stay here, don't change your link, and we'll see you in the closing ceremony in just one moment. Many thanks indeed.